So, my name is Florian Meisenberg. I'm an artist and I paint, but I also do lots of like digital things and digital projects, and the digital sphere is like, I don't know, since I actually encountered computers, a very sort of vivid playground for my creativity or imagination as a painter. I want to start with, or like show something which is quite old, like kind of, I just rediscovered it recently, but it's kind of an iconic piece for me, which I did like almost 11 or 12 years ago, which is when I just moved to New York from Düsseldorf, from the academy in Düsseldorf to Ridgewood, New York. And this was at a time when I discovered one of the first screen capture softwares back then, and I just realized it still exists. It's called it back then, and still today it's called I Show You. This is my first tutorial, and I'm going to show you how to copy my signature. It's just like this. So you just actually start with the vertical line, finishing with the right curve at the end, and the next step of that is just starting about here, making a right turn. Basically, I put this on YouTube. Back then Vimeo didn't exist, and I got a lot of hate comments for the video. I don't know what people expected when they found my video, or like what they expected when they put in how to copy your signature, but or my signature, but people didn't like it. And it's the most viewed and most commented video I have on YouTube. And let me know your feedback. I'm curious and I'm open for critiques, so see you next time. I knew I wanted to study art, but I got this opportunity to study for 2 years like media design, and it was back then when, you know, the media bubble was just as big as it got, just before it burst. So I chose to do that for 2 years, and that's when I actually got into computers, and so that was really the first time for these 2 years where I was really working in teams, and we did develop websites and projects, like digital projects, artworks also, and since then I think that this like possibilities, or this like openness of the digital sphere never really lost its fascination to me, and it's really connected to the infinite possibilities I feel related to painting. This is a video documentary or documentation of a project I realized for a show in New York. It's the first project I realized in collaboration with the coder, with Tommy Martinez. I wanted not to create just an animation, but I wanted to create a sort of an interactive live render of a situation, or like a fluid, like almost like a black or gray goo or mass, which acts as a sort of black hole, absorbing things, 3D things, three-dimensional things like renders, and what you could see just flying in now in this kind of like cryptical sort of skybox. Basically, we were able to connect the scene, this three-dimensional scene of the blob floating, to different like libraries, like 3D libraries on the internet, which were open to it, or like possible to connect tech-wise. So the blob was always like, or is always sort of like a live pulling either wireframes, like in this case, or proper 3D objects, and has this little sort of choreography or like stage dance in this free floating or zero gravity condition, to kind of absorb them or like swallow them into this other dimension. So, and it was always different because everything worked on algorithms rather than frame by frame animation. Through that first programming experience with Tommy, I also ran into the concept of skyboxes, and that became a really big sort of like concept or like exploration or territory for exploration in my painterly like sphere. Is essentially sort of a cube. That's why the name skybox, which is like textured with imagery, normally in games like skies or horizons. Yeah, this was the first one I made. And I mean, of course, painting itself is always a skybox, or the space you try to create. It's always the simulation of space, or the illusion of space and depths. And to kind of like emphasize on the concept of the skybox, I want to show briefly something I made for Bomb magazine, which was like in the beginning just an interview. Yeah, we basically turned the interview into sort of road trip, or like interactive road trip and experience, living on the Bomb magazine side. This is the painting I just showed you, unfolded, folded back together as a skybox. But I placed like this kind of like Florian universe inside of it, and that's sort of more difficult to sort of experience if you don't follow the predetermined path. Like
I first met Florian Meisenberg in 2015 when I had the occasion to write about his work and situate it within some rather heated debates surrounding abstract
if you follow
painting. Back then and still today, what's so intriguing about his practice is the ability to cross-link seemingly opposite
That's Peter
categories.
speaking. So you're taken through 3D models of shows and shows which never happened, shows which happened, and you just like go deeper and deeper into the conversation while exploring this model. I think this is a really good example of that sort of open space, or the openness and the potential I associate with the digital sphere. In 2016, I was invited to be part of a show at the Schön Kunsthalle in Frankfurt, which is a big institution, and it was about like the group show about sort of the self-portrait, or Ich, which means me in English. So it was new forms of self-portrait, and I created this piece, an installation for it, which involved the skybox painting, to come back to it, and then also like a gigantic screen, which you can see here. In that situation, there's the screensaver on with like the sort of the timestamp and the weather information, but essentially it was kind of like the screensaver of my phone. During the entire duration of the show, I was essentially screen sharing my phone. Like there was all these, like, I don't know, like trying to think of it now, like all these memories, but like it was a kind of a self-experiment, of course, of social proportions, but also psychological proportions, because of course I set it up, I knew about it, so, but still doing it for a day is something else than doing it for like 6 months. And you of course forget about it, and you just use your phone as you would use your phone normally. On the opening specifically, when I was there, I realized that people got really uncomfortable around the work, because they realized there was a sort of like live aspect and a sort of surveillance aspect to the work. And I also, of course, because of the scale of the piece, it intimidated people, and they got really uncomfortable. This is the last web-based project I was working on. Basically, the idea was to kind of utilize all of the imagery, or like the paintings I created, use them as like backdrops, or like stills, almost like for an animation, where all of the paintings sort of almost like drip and melt into each other, and it's also interactive to some extent. But if you don't do anything, it still does something. So it has this ghostly sort of animation to it. So it's kind of this kind of ghostly recording of scribbles or mark making and gestures, but basically repurposes all of these swipes and actually private or individual gestures, if you want to call them like that, utilizes them to actually apply them as a filter almost and tool to this ongoing animation. During the pandemic, during the lockdown, or last year basically, I started setting up a machine, or like a setup in my studio for a machine drawing, a drawing machine or robot. Basically, I had the computer and the machine draw these spaces, these kind of squares, like infinite squares, and while it was executing the file, I was moving the canvas. So I created this sort of like interruption, or sort of I became the glitch, or like the error or the virus in the executable of the machine. I want to get into this more, and I think I want to maybe even like develop my own program where all of these interactions or interferences are maybe happening at an earlier stage of image creation.
Zerbrechen.
Got really uncomfortable. This is the last web-based project I was working on. Basically, the idea was to kind of utilize all of the last web-based project I was working on. Basically, the idea was to kind of use them as like backdrops or like stills, like the paintings I created for an animation where all of the paintings sort of almost like drip and melt into each other, and it's also interactive to some extent. Melt into each other. But if you don't do anything, it still does something. So if you don't has this ghostly sort of animation to it. So it's kind of this kind of ghostly recording of scribbles or mark making and gestures. But basically repurposes all of these swipes and actually private or individual gestures, if you want to call them like that, utilizes them to actually apply them as a filter almost and tool to this ongoing animation. During the pandemic, during the lockdown, or last year basically, I started setting up a machine, or like set up in my studio for a machine drawing, a drawing machine, or robot. Basically, I had the computer and the machine draw these spaces, these kind of squares, like infinite squares, and while it was executing the file, I was moving the canvas. So I created this sort of like interruption, I became the glitch, or like the error or the virus in the executable of the machine. I want to get into this more, and I think I want to maybe even like develop my own program where all of these interactions or interferences are maybe happening at an earlier stage of image creation.